Good afternoon, traders, and welcome to this Axia stream where we're going to be looking at our elite Axia traders execution over 4 different sources or source comments which came out on Thursday the 23rd of April. Now, just a little bit of a lead into what we're going to see today after having a discussion with our elite trader. This was a day where it started quite badly. I think it got caught in I think the Gilt as they were pushing higher, and he was short. And it's just a bit of an example of how staying with the day, maintaining your focus, and then being able to really kind of switch gears and up your aggressiveness when the opportunity does arise. It can really kind of demonstrate what's possible on all those days which we all have, where you feel like everything's kind of going against you. You're not really you're either not seeing it very well or not getting a fair grab on what's happening, and really just a demonstration of how that pure grit can really aid and result in some outstanding days. We've seen our elite Axia trader producing some huge days. He surpassed the 1 million mark I think at the start of the year on the Iran stuff. And really now it's just a case of, since the heightened volatility, the whole landscape changing as we're in the midst of this COVID crisis, that there's certain adaptations which have to be made, which certainly from a junior trader's perspective, finding it quite tough. But this is where the experience of the really experienced traders really comes in. And can be really useful and helpful if you can kind of take some key lessons from them, as you can really be able to start to understand how these markets work. So without too much talking, I'm going to crack on, because it's quite a lot to get through. There's 4 separate things that I want to look at. So the first being a comment from the Bank of Japan, where I don't remember the actual wording. I think I've got a screenshot of one of the headlines, but essentially related to them stepping up their bond buying with no cap on how much they would buy. So we're going to see how he executes in the yen, and then the Bunds off the back of this. Really expecting to see the JGBs move. Not that we have the ladders of those, but that's the Japanese bonds. And potentially dragging the European bonds as a result. But otherwise, the real direct market that we're going to see him executing in this would be the yen, which is quite new, really. We haven't seen many trades where he's executing in that, so quite useful to see. The second is just a comment that's come out off the back of we've been waiting, or we had been waiting certainly up to this point, on some sort of collective response of what sort of stimulus package the European Union is going to put forward. And there's been some back and forth with regards to sort of corona bonds as being one option, or just general loans or grants given to each country. And there's been a bit of dispute between, for example, Italy, Netherlands, Germany, as to what way is the best way to go forward. But it just was one of those days. The European Summit was occurring later on that day, and as we've noticed before, when certain themes are in play, individual comments can get a little bit more traction. And this was a comment from the German chancellor Merkel, and she's usually quite kind of pretty timid or reserved with the statements that she makes. And this was just one comment where, again, I've got a screenshot of the actual headline which came out, but it's something along the lines of, we need a huge response or a huge level of stimulus to fight this crisis. And we're going to see just how the correlations aligned between the European bonds, equities and the euro, to have a really nice correlated move off the back of this. Albeit not a huge comment, like it could be taken out of context in isolation. It doesn't really mean that much, but in a kind of heightened sensitivity environment, it offers a little bit more to go on. The next is remdesivir. So I don't know if I'm saying that right, but this is essentially the drug which last week we had a big I think it was over the weekend or certainly overnight, risk on move and a big gap open off the back of this drug being held as potentially a big vaccine. And just having a look very quickly, it's probably quite interesting to show. If you have a look at this is Gilead, which is the company that produces the drug, and this is a 60-minute of their share value. Now I don't trade on this, but I use this for charts, and you can see that this was the big move off the back of this drug being held as a potential vaccine or miracle cure, and then later on that day or during the day, the first trading day afterwards, I think there was some sort of responses how it shouldn't have been leaked, this was meant to be private information, and the market kind of pushed back on it a little bit. And then I believe here is where we got an article essentially saying that it was a bit of a flop, which had some interesting developments as to how the article and the headline had a little bit of a differing message. So we're going to see how our elite trader executes off the back of that to take advantage of that discrepancy between the headline and the content. And then finally, this was probably one of the biggest events of the day, something that I had kind of failed to see the real significance, just given that some of the comments that were coming out prior to this weren't really moving it, but again, or weren't really moving the markets. Again, just a bit of a lesson as to when the market has demonstrated sensitivity on this sort of topic. For example, you could link this to what we saw with the Merkel comment. It kind of brought this into play a lot more, and it didn't. The results of this meeting came out towards the end of the day, kind of coincided with the move off the back of this remdesivir article. But again, it's just a really nice one to show how the correlations are working between this 0.2 and 4, as I mentioned before. So really going to crack on, get to the ladders, and what I've got it is queued up where I'm playing at 1 times the speed. So if I ever change the speed, you'll see it in this right hand box, and I've got it queued up so that you can see the headline just before it breaks. So I'm going to have to fast forward through certain bits, but just to show you what markets we're going to be looking at. So this is the Bund's. Excuse me, I haven't got a pen, so it's going to take a little bit longer. And what we'll see is in the bottom left corner, you can see here he's currently 40k down on the day, but because this is just a capture of his main trading screen, the way our elite trader works, as many of you would have seen who've seen these streams before, is that he kind of has a main dashboard for the markets that are in play, but he has multiple monitors containing all the ladders of pretty much all the markets he'd be willing to hit comments on. And because the yen isn't one of his core markets that he'll be executing frequently on, it's not on this screen. But what you'll see is this number in the CME net position box, that should jump as I think he sells potentially up to 180 yen, and sells or buys, I can't remember, and then he will drag the screen in, and I believe he puts it in this position. So I'll highlight it as now, just so that we can play this forward. But so I'm going to crack on, and essentially the comment you can see up the top here: Bank of Japan considering increasing amount of commercial paper and corporate bond purchases, and Bank of Japan to discuss unlimited bond buying at next policy setting meeting. So these are the Bunds. You'd expect them to push higher, but otherwise it's going to be mainly contained within the Japanese markets, being the JGB and the yen. So let's just play this forward. So you can see it's just coming into the cash open, the US cash open at 230, and you can see he's 180 lots short in the yen, as I pointed out here, and he's just going to drag this ladder over. You've seen the Bunds go bid a couple of ticks, but he's got quite big size in this yen. Just notice that he's compressed these ladders, so it is full lots per tick, if that makes sense. There's no half ticks on here. Up to 250 lots short in the yen and 180 lots long in the bunds. And really up to 300 lots now in the yen. And I'll move my mouse just so you can see his mouse moving more clearly. And as this Bund position goes offside, he's very quick just to kind of be quite prudent in scaling out, and then applies his usual execution method, where in with big size and then scaling out with small clips or small orders on the bid or offer. So you can see in the yen being 250 to 300 lots short, but he's scaling out with twos on the bid, laying them all the way down the page, so as the market rotates it kind of works him out of his position. But really this is a method for him to stay in the trade longer. It would be very easy, as this started pulling back in the yen, to get out very quickly, but it just keeps him in there long enough to see if there's a second test of the lows. He'll be able to take advantage of that kind of volatility within the comment. And as you can see, the Bund position just didn't really work out. It was one of those ones where you could be quite hopeful that the Bunds would be dragged by the JGBs, but in this instance hasn't really worked. But as it came back to his average entry around 11s in the Bunds, he did add back in up to 150 lots, something that you'll see this trader doing quite a lot. He did speak to me about potentially executing within the S&P on this, just be it more of a kind of something that specifically talks about the bonds, but potentially could have an impact in the equities. However, just something that he drew to my attention was that didn't really look to execute in the SPU, mainly off the back of it was bang on the cash open, the US Open, if you notice that, around 230, and what you can have is like a very quick influx of volatility coming into the market. You can see on the right hand side he's just bought 30 lots into the highs of the S&P, and this is what he was talking about. He said that I got on and I hit it quite late and only with small size, because he was quite hesitant to be executing in the S&P, which is this market here on the right hand side, on the cash open, given with that heightened volatility it wouldn't be unusual for there to be just a real big kind of 10 handle squeeze, and you don't really want to be caught with big size when it's not the kind of most direct market which would be impacted by this comment. But just another thing that's brought into his execution. You can see now he's holding these three positions, scaled out quite aggressively of that SPU position, but after being 180 lots long in the Bunds, going offside 5 or 6 ticks, and then it coming back on side, just the fact that he added back into his average price around 11s, it's just kept him in this trade and really just starting to balance out how much he would have potentially lost if he just solidified or locked in that loser when it did go against him in the Bund. So you can see him continue to scale out as the markets slow down, start to find some balance, start to figure out whether this comment is really going to bite or really going to hold a move and start to trend. As we can see in the yen, it doesn't really look like that's necessarily the case, but I do expect that if it was to roll over and start trading down through these lows, I wouldn't be surprised if this trade would be willing to get in with some more size to try to eke out this move for a little bit more. So he's covered his SPU position. He's working this Bund position. Sometimes the market can start to trend from the US Open as well. So as these Bunds are starting to push higher, it's something where he's willing to kind of build into that position with a view of it potentially taking the highs through these 172s here. But just going to see how he manages this position quite nicely. Where you could potentially expect to see more kind of risk on, risk off moves. I'm going to discuss this a little bit more, how the correlations become a little bit more disjointed and the markets can be seen to be doing their own individual thing, as big participants are kind of stepping in at any time really in each individual market. So we're seeing off comments these correlations start to come into play, but otherwise you can see here we've got equities and bonds both pushing the highs at the same time, while yen's pushing the lows. So just something to take in to some of the subsequent comments, which I'm going to show in a second. But I'm actually going to fast forward through this a little bit because I said we've got lots to show. So just going to step this up to 4 times the speed and see how he manages this position. Just adding a little bit more into this yen position as it starts to approach the low. And as I said before, you know, when he suspects that it's going to ping the low, he'll be willing to get in with some more size, lay bids through the low. So if it does splash through a new low, it's going to fill him on those orders. You can see him still willing to get a little bit more into this yen. The S&P still pushing higher, which in turn should play, if the correlations were working, into this yen rolling over a little bit more too. But you can see that kind of you know, very purposeful execution where he's chosen to stay in the trade, not smash and grab, and then be willing to add a little bit more back in and try to see if it does roll over and take the new low. Has really paid off in this situation. He's gone from being 30 to 50k down, as you can see here, to 50 to 60k up on the day, with, you know, over 100k of that coming from this yen trade. As you can see, that's the kind of the CME P&L allocation here. But after it's taken that low and then does start to bounce, you know, he's quite prudently scaled out. But you know, that was a nice 10-minute move, but really kind of really disciplined. In a relatively thin market, it could be quite easy when this did pull all the way back to his average entry to start sort of scaling out quite aggressively. But this Bund position hasn't really worked. But again, this is kind of one of those situations, something that I've really tried to bring into my trading, where by hitting multiple markets, although some people could say that why would you do that and not just put more size into one market, as it kind of you have to share your attention or your focus amongst 2 ladders in that situation. You do get the situation quite often where, you know, between the markets that you hit, some react well, some react not so well, and it kind of balances out or smooths out the results a little bit. So although he has taken a loser in this Bund position, I don't think he'd be overly concerned, given that, you know, he really got the bigger size in the yen. So I'm going to leave this one now, and I'm going to jump to the next trade. So you can see now, just drawing your attention to, again, he's going to be executing mainly in the bunds. I also want you to pay attention to the euro. And I can't recall if he moves his ladders around a bit, but then this is also Euro Stoxx, which I believe he gets quite heavy on that. And just a few notes that he gave me. So coming into this, he was long into this. He thought the day was shaping up to be quite bullish. He'd been long since that Bank of Japan comment, which came out 45 minutes ago. So you can see, you know, the idea that he had in buying the bunds, which we saw in the preceding comment, it did eventually play out, and he managed to stay with that position all the way through. However, as I mentioned before, he didn't really see this as a huge comment, but given the context and really just looking at the reaction, particularly in the euro, which I want you to pay attention to, it kind of set off that risk on as a result of these comments. So Germany's Merkel says EU leaders' talks had good atmosphere. We may find a way through. Germany's Merkel say must expect higher contributions to the next EU budget from Germany. Germany's Merkel says it's clear from EU talks that everyone says a recovery fund is needed. Sorry, this is the wrong comment. I take that back. Hold on 1 second. I'm just going to see if I can find the actual comment. If you just bear with me for a second. Okay, so I haven't got the comment here, but please disregard this. And it was something along the lines of, you know, Germany's Merkel feels a huge response or huge amount of stimulus will be required to fight this. So quite hawkish and really producing quite a bit of risk on as a result. So if I just get rid of that, and going to play this forward at regular speed, and really want to see how he has to first get out of this position, this Bund position. As in a risk on scenario, you're going to see equities pushing higher, bonds pushing lower, and with it being relative to Europe, we're going to see the euro push higher as well. But really what I want you to notice is as the Bunds flick down, obviously off the back they've been quite bid, so it's a nice one to get a quick knee-jerk offer off the back of it, seeing as they're trading very much towards the highs. But he gets out of his position, but he only chooses to cut and reverse and then lump into the equities as well, as you'll notice in stocks when the euro starts flying. So quite a lot to go on, but just really want you to pay attention to how quickly this happened. So you see he's flicked down, he's got out of his Bund position, the comments come out, he's flat, he's out of absolutely everything. Now just pay attention to the euro and just to see what this does. Euro just starting to drift higher a little bit, trading 13s, 14s, and now starts getting a move on. You can see it's pushing higher, and as the euro goes, he's brought his BTP ladder over, because that's another market that's very much in play on this, on anything sort of EU Commission Europe based. But he's still very relaxed, very calm. He hasn't lumped into anything yet. Just seeing if this is going to bite and it's really going to take hold. Maybe seeing if it gets more traction on some squawks. But as it does, he hits 90 lots, or he sells 90 lots in the Bunds. I think that was a 100 lot bid at 21s in Euro Stoxx. Adds another sort of 100, 120 lots maybe into the high, so it's up to 240 lots. Offside in both, but now really pay attention to the euro here. As this really gets going, he starts to sort of increase his exposure, even though he's offside or pretty much flat in both positions. You can see the Bund goes immediately against him, which is really not what you want to see, but it's quite good to see how long he kind of stayed with this trade, considering he's quite exposed in this position right now. 200 lots, 5 ticks offside in Euro Stoxx, 200 lots, 5 ticks offside, or 180 lots, 5 ticks offside in the Bunds. Just moving his ladders so that they're close together. You'll see him doing this quite often, just so he can kind of work between laying orders on the bid and offer more efficiently when they're closer together. Euro still kind of creeping towards its highs. BTP's creeping towards its highs as well. But as this trade starts to work, I really want you to pay attention to first the reaction we see in the Bunds. When this does start going, it essentially just kind of rolls over and trades all the way down to VWAP on the day in a pretty swift move. And that kind of flush move that he was looking for, he stays in the Euro Stoxx until he sees a similar move. So you can see the Bunds really starting to look a little bit heavy now and offering over. Just not really much coming back and hitting into the offer. It's got a small clip in the BTPs, buying the highs. But really the Stoxx position is quite interesting in this, because it does, the Euro Stoxx just kind of, it's sideways, 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 and then does the straight line move, and then sideways, 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 or reversal again. So it's one of those markets where if you're not in it already, when the move does happen, it's quite hard to kind of be on it, which, really pays off in this instance. He doesn't panic out. He might sort of tighten his risk a little bit or reduce his size a little bit, but as it starts going, looking to get even more in here, back up to sort of that 300 lots level. really quite heavy in both the Bunds and the Euro Stoxx now. BTP's gone on side as well. And the BTP is just one of those ones where it looks like he's bought into the highs and he's just let that one play out, not playing around with it too much. When it does go, it can go on very small, very low volume sometimes. Laying some offers in the BTP to be hit out. You know, understanding this Bund could probably still have some more of a way to go, and Stoxx hasn't even really done its move yet. Just pay attention to how much time, you know, he's given this. This wasn't a very quick move. It's one that really had to give a little bit more time to allow it to play out. And even then, you know, Euro Stoxx, for example, they never really released until the end, but he's still willing to get some more size in there. I think he's got 100 lots on the bid, which he's just pulled, but maintaining around the 300 lot position in the Euro Stoxx. Out of his BTP position, cleared his resting offers. Just doing some kind of housekeeping, you know, making sure that he does have bids and offers in all of the markets that he's got size on, just in case there is that ping, that flush, will enable him to really scale out aggressively without having to do much. So trying to get a lot of the hard work out the way now so he can really focus on working these positions. Getting quite aggressive into the highs, trying to add another kind of 190 lots into the Euro Stoxx. And you can see there he was just clearing the offer in the Euro Stoxx at 27s, and I think that's because if you try to hit the bid when you've got a small resting offer there, you know, it won't go through. So again, just showing that, you know, everything that he's thinking about at this time is trying to get more on while, you know, the move hasn't been done in the Euro Stoxx. You know, the Bunds might not be one to be adding in this late in the move, considering it started, I think, around the 23s, potentially higher. So it's already done 20 ticks, but Stoxx has only sort of done, you know, between 7 and 8 ticks by now, but at the time it hadn't gone that far. So just interesting to note, you know, where his aggression is based on, you know, which markets are yet to complete their move or complete, you know, a reasonable proportion of what you would expect it to go based on how much the other correlated markets are moving. But still paying attention to the euro, it's still relatively bid. I think if you were to see the euro turn and start to kind of really offer over, probably, you know, you'd think that probably take that as a cue to maybe scale out a little bit more aggressively. But at this time, he seems quite comfortable in just maintaining these positions until everything seems to have been exhausted, or the move seems to have been exhausted. But again, just some notes that, you know, he didn't feel like this was a huge comment, but given the reaction in the correlations, this is one where, you know, he let the market tell him what it wanted to do in this scenario and just went with it. So I'm going to fast forward this one because we've got another 2 to get through. 4 times the speed, and just watch how he exits these positions. And I think it's very kind of effective with where he scaled out the remainder of his Bund position right towards the VWAP. From recollection, it bounced quite hard from there and went all the way back up sort of towards the highs. But you see the Bund's really emptying out, doing this last bit of the move relatively quickly. And this is where he was saying he's just staying with that Stoxx position. He felt like it had a flush in it and didn't want to be out until he'd seen that kind of finishing flush, which we so frequently see on these comments. Again, still willing to get a little bit more in. Pretty much out of his Bund position yet, and just focusing on this Euro Stoxx position now. Up 140k on the day. Euro taking the high again, and you'll see Euro Stoxx pushing through the high. Some nice correlation there between, you know, the timing of them breaking their highs. So you can see, in fact, the euro, it leads the Euro Stoxx just a little bit. So worthwhile paying attention to that on any kind of, you know, Europe driven or EU Commission, EU summit driven comments that we may have going forward. So this is the flush in stocks that he was waiting for. Just interesting to see whether he works any more into this stocks position. But I think as the Bund bounces quite hard, Euro comes back inside into range. You know, he's very quick to get out of that position. That's something I hadn't noticed so well. He, you know, again, the reason that he got in to this position was off the back of the correlations. So he didn't fight them and try to stay with the trade when, you know, they also provided the information that he needed to scale out or close his positions as well. So now coming on to a bit of an interesting one. This is later in the day, around 5:45, and we did have the right comment here. So Gilead antiviral drug remdesivir flops in first trial, and this is from an FT article. But the way these come out is you obviously, the first response is going to be off the headline, and then this is just an interesting one to see as the squawk starts to or the content of the article starts to gain more traction across our various news services. That's when we start to see a bit of a reaction. But I really want you to pay attention to the SPU as the primary market for this. And then can't remember exactly. I think he may execute in the Bunds, and it's worth seeing the Bunds. This is out of hours, so the cash close at 4:15. It gets quite quiet. You can see the offers really thin. The bid and offers really thinned out, and it's one of those ones where there's not much price action to read in this market out of hours, and so it's not one that he'd go massively aggressive on. But really, this is one in the SPU. But what we're going to see is the SPU blips down, and he misses. He gets partial filled on 6 lots out of 180 lot clip, and it had to affect how he addressed the rest of the move, or how he executed the rest of the move. Because what you don't want to be doing, or what he reiterated to me that you don't want to be doing, is if you hit in a good price and you don't get filled and the market blips down, for example, when you're then hitting at worse prices, your risk is so much more stretched than what it was at that first clip. So he said that when he did get in, he was getting in with smaller size after missing his fills on the initial clip. But it's actually the reversal of this, which the frame should pause when we start to see him enter in the other direction. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the reasoning behind that. So just going to play this forward. Really pay attention to SPU and the Bunds. So you can see, oh sorry, I'm going to start that again, we're too fast. So back to 1 times the speed. So you can see he hits there at 18.5. He gets left offered 154 lots. So does add in a little bit more, but you can see him scaling quite aggressively. 230 lots he's up to. You can see where his initial clip was that 18.5. He ended up dragging his average price down to around 14.5. So giving up, 4 handles there. In 270 lots in the Bunds long, as this kind of typical risk off kind of comes into play. But scaling out quite quickly, you can see just the fact that he didn't get filled at that 18.5. So it kind of affected where his average price was and how aggressive he had to scale out of that trade. Had he got filled them at that price, perhaps he would have had, it would have been easier to hold more size for potentially a bit of a bigger move. But very much smashing and grabbing with his second entry in the SPU. And the Bund, you can just see not really taking to it that much. It's quite heavy in there considering the time of day, and it's not really working out as you would expect. still willing to get a little bit more size in the Bunds, as it hasn't moved, maybe thinking that, you know, this still has room to release given the size of the move in the SPU. But what we're going to see is, as the article contradicts the headlines, the content of the article, you know, essentially it leads to the fact that Gilead have disputed the initial results, which have deemed this a failure in the eyes of that headline. And we're going to see him now, he's starting to work a long position. So I think this is the first moment where, you know, there's a little bit of, I think he just had some resting bids there. But if you just pay attention, this Bund move has really started to kind of, you know, take a little bit, but it hasn't been moving on much volume. So it's quite a heavy position to be having, given that how much is trading. You know, you're seeing, you know, sub 100 lots easily taking out a price. I think only 20 lots taking out a price as it starts to come back down. But just going to fast forward this to the next part of the move. So you can see he works this Bund position. Here we go. So back to normal speed now. And this is when he said that it started getting more traction, that potentially the content of this article was a little bit contradictory to what the actual headline said. I haven't got all the wording of the article there because I didn't think it was really relevant, but this is just an example of how the market has a knee-jerk reaction to the headline. Then as it starts to digest the kind of more detailed content, it can start to have a bit of a different reaction, where it might not be seen as good, but it certainly can be seen as not quite as bad. And as such, we're going to see him start to buy the S&P and trade a bit of this reversal in this market. So I'm going to play this forward now. And equally, as he starts to buy the S&P, he gets more aggressive, I believe, in scaling out of his Bund position. I think he just clipped 100 lots into row 2s just to get back down to 250 lots. And I think now he's relatively aggressive as the long really starts to get some traction in the S&P. I think as multiple kind of news services are really starting to get onto the fact that this move, or this article, you know, has a bit more to go on than just what the initial headline said. And he said this was actually quite a good trade for him. He managed to do, you know, probably better on the long than he did on the initial sell. But just pay attention, we talk quite a bit about these denial trades which we see, and generally see him kind of being quite aggressive, smashing and grabbing with the denial. And then if that denial move overextends, he'll then look to fade that again, which we're going to see happening shortly. So you see he's played the long, and then he feels that that was actually quite a big move, quite a big bounce, considering, you know, the way that this has come out. So he's now trying to play a little bit more from the short side. And this is where we're going to see another comment come out from the EU Commission while he's in this trade. But you see he's pretty much out of his Bund position and hasn't made a whole lot on that, unfortunately, given the size that he had on, but not willing to just hold on to it for the sake of it. You know, when he started to see, you know, the core market, which should be affected by this, be it US equities, has bounced quite hard. But this is just a really nice example of a kind of a structured hit the comment, then fade that on the denial, and then fade the kind of over bounce or the over correction which came from that denial. But really you can see out of probably, I don't know how much it was, maybe a 20-25 handle chop, you know, he's managed to capitalize on kind of 3 phases or 3 flows that came in from that. But just going to fast forward this now to get to the last one. So at 4 times the speed now. So he stays with this for quite a long time. Just ekes out a little bit more when you think, you know, that 40 lot short, I don't know how much he made, but it's always just these little ways that he adds into his execution just to add that extra 10%, 5%, You know, that's how you really start to push the boundaries of, you know, how much how much profit you can make based on the risk you're allocating. So you can see he's working the long again in the S&P. Not going to watch all of this, but I think this is just another wave. Four times the speed. I know it's quite hard to kind of, you know, see the ins and outs of his execution for that part of the move, but I think you've got the gist of it from what he's done so far. So I'm actually going to move forward to the next one, the final one, and you can see he's done it again after playing that long in the SPU. He's actually cut in reverse and is now short in the S&P again. But what we need to take note of, he's actually long, or he is long in the Bunds at this moment, and this is when the comment of the breakdown of the talks, or EU leaders talks, end with no agreement on recovery package. Now, there'd been quite a lot of expectation built into this. I think there was an expectation really in the market that they were going to come out of this meeting with something, given how critical the kind of timing is now. But we're going to see how he really loads up. He's already 280k up on the day, given, if you recall, at the start of the first comment, the BOJ comment, he was, I think, 50k down on the day. So it's really turning it around at this point, and this is where he really excels, where it seems his confidence is up. He knows he's got that buffer to kind of to work with, to allocate if any subsequent comments come out. I'm just going to watch how aggressive he gets across the Bunds, Euro Stoxx, and the Euro. But I think what's interesting here, if you watch the Euro, which we see here, he actually goes instantly offside in the Euro. I think maybe in all three markets. And I think this is something really to pay attention to, because the way he recalled it to me was, you know, it felt really bad really quickly, but then as everything started to drift back towards you know, the prices that he'd got, so given this is risk off, you'd expect Euro to go down, bonds to go up, and equities to go down. But he actually holds everything and does go quite a bit offside, which, you know, I didn't ask him, but perhaps the fact that he was up quite a bit on the day, it really enabled him to do it. But we do see him doing that quite a bit. You know, he does have you know, really good nerves when it comes to holding the right trades at the right times. But he said he did scale out quite aggressively, and then I think there was a subsequent comment, which I haven't got here, something relatively positive that Merkel said following on from this, which just meant he wasn't that aggressive in holding it. So I think he was a little bit disappointed in how executed, but I still think it's, you know, some really good execution to watch here. So just playing forward at normal speed. You know, he's just added up to 100 lots SPU short, 360 lots short in his Euro Stoxx position, 180 lots short in his Euro position, and I think he'd added 100 lots into his Bund position already. But just want you to pay attention now. This is really kind of important. He starts going offside with big size really across three markets. And this is not a comfortable position to be in. I think he's 500 lots, you know, 700 lots across sort of 3 or 4 markets. You know, it adds a little bit more into the SPU, but very exposed here really, and just kind of hoping that this this comment does bite in the market as you would expect it to. But you can see now everything just starting to slowly drift back. The Euro's coming back towards his average entry. The Bunds are through his average entry. He's now in the space of less than a minute. He's gone to onside and in relatively good position, certainly in 2 of the 4 markets. starts to add into this Bund. But the euro's still offside, which is quite unusual really, given how the correlations have been playing out throughout the day. You know, you really would have thought, given how much the euro pushed up on the really positive Merkel comment that we saw him executing earlier in the day, you know, you'd think that it would be more reactive than it is. But again, just an example of, you know, how executing across multiple markets, it kind of smooths out the result a little bit more. And as the Euro Stoxx starts to go on side, and the SPU as well, the euro comes back down. I think he ends up taking a winner in all three markets. See, so slow to really take hold, but when it does get going, there's no looking back really. But just interesting that given that the other markets are responding as you would expect them to, you know, that's, you know, giving him a good reason to stay with that euro position, where, you know, if you were just in the euro in isolation, you probably would have took a pretty heavy loser by now. So just sort of shows spreading your risk across the markets can work in your favour in some instances. But he was very, very quick. If you saw how quick he was to execute across those four markets, you know, it was really quite impressive how quickly he, you know, hit the Bund, then added into his SPU, then hit, I think, 3 or 2 big clips into Euro Stoxx, and then 3 big clips into the euro. But now just managing these positions, understanding that a little bit later in the day it's probably going to take a little bit more time, but this Bund, as it does start going, it just trades through prices so easily because there's just not really anything there. There's nothing really sitting behind these offers that it can just take them out on. You sold 20 lots, 30 lots, 50 lots. Currently up 340k on the day. But the euro's still offside. But just quite nice, quite sort of measured, considered execution, as we always see. Just making sure he's keeping up with each market, that there's something, however small, sitting on the bid or offer. Just so constantly, you know, reducing his exposure a little bit, but not quick enough that he doesn't take advantage of the full kind of meat of the move when these do finally get going. Not sure if he gets more into euro as it comes back through his opening price. You can see there's actually a buyer sat in the euro around here. As it just flicked down, it got bid straight back up immediately, which often is you see when, I don't know what it is, if it's an iceberg or some sort of big order, a market stop or something like that, that's set just to be hit as soon as that price gets hit. But I think as it maybe trades through these sort of 88s area, it might get going. But I'm actually just going to speed this up a little bit. Just going to move to 2 times the speed. See how far we can get before I have a few points that I just want to finish up on. So there will be a point that we'll come to see where he starts to get out a little bit more aggressively. He's actually added more into his Bund position, into the highs around 24s, maybe just looking for a splash through this this high of the day at 29s. Pretty much out of his SPU position. You know, just stepping up the size of the bids that he's got, sitting, resting in the stocks up to 10 lots, which again just instead of kind of aggressively scaling out, he adjusts the size of his resting bids and offers depending on how kind of aggressive he wants, but that enables him to just maintain the same execution pretty much on every part of the trade or every stage of the trade, and just adjust the size accordingly. So started to get out a little bit quicker. Maybe that Merkel comment has come through. It's just approaching up 400k on the day, so obviously outstanding result for the day. But I'm just going to fast forward this through just to the last at 4 times the speed. So conscious for time. So the euro position only just starting to go on side, but I think by this point, he's kind of, scratching that position as he had to scale out of sort of half of his size when he was offside. Still willing to add 100 lots into the highs of the Bunds at 30s, just to try to get a little bit more out. But I think this is just a good lesson in, how staying with the trade, even in these slow conditions, it's much harder to stay with the trade in slow conditions when you don't really see much happening. It's a lot easier, I find, to kind of talk yourself out of, whatever trade or position you're in. But although the instant reaction was relatively bad, he was pretty. It was pretty amazing how he managed to stay in all of those positions until they'd done pretty much the entirety of the move. Okay, so I'm just going to move back. Just a couple of key takeaways that I want to share with you that I spoke to him with before doing this stream. And the first one, just kind of stay with it. I think it's just a real good example of how, being down on the day, and you never know when there's going to be a good run of 3 comments or so in a row. So just keep your head up and be ready and willing to get aggressive if you see the reaction that you want, or you hear the right comment. The second one, as I mentioned before, where you get these, in high volatility periods, he says that traditional kind of risk on risk off correlations can break down, as we've seen in this crisis with this central bank intervention, a massive amount of bond buying. It's going to skew those traditional correlations somewhat. However, what we do see is on the comments, the knee-jerk reaction does fulfill that kind of traditional correlation, which we've seen over the past, certainly the couple of years that I've been watching, where you'll see bonds go bid, equities offer, and then the currency is kind of moving in line with whatever territory the comment is revolving around. So just something to pay attention to. For me, it's been quite easy, as the markets kind of seem to not make as much sense on the day-to-day what they're doing for the moves, just to try to revert back to what you would be so used to doing in normal conditions when you hear these comments. And then finally, the content of an article, it can always be different to what these headlines say, and it offered 3 really good trades there in that instance, where we saw as I mentioned before, the initial offer, the fade, and then effectively the fade of the fade. But it just really opened up a lot of opportunity out of one article, which, to be honest, it could be completely bogus anyway. That's not really what matters in this instance. It's whether the market cares about it, and then as the new information is drip fed through your various news feeds, how the market is positioned and what that's going to mean for the resulting moves that come off the back of it. So I know that's a lot, but I think it's been really interesting seeing, the story of how this has played out throughout the course of an afternoon, and some really good kind of information there from our elite trader along with his executions. So trade well. Hopefully we'll be back with some more of these, really outstanding performances to share with you in the near future. So trade well. Speak soon. Cheers.